The church has understood mission in 6 different ways. And I think biblically you could make a case for each of the 6 ways. But I think the last 3 that I'm going to mention are the 3 that we need to emphasize today. Number 1 is proclamation. Okay. Tell John the poor have the good news preached to them. All right? There's no doubt that that's the center of our mission, to share the good news of the gospel with other people. Secondly, I call it recruitment. You might want to call it church growth, evangelism, whatever. But gathering people, adding numbers to the group. And that's just normal because we are missionary people. Third, some people have seen the church as the mission. Now, in some ways, it is, in the sense that we need a center place, some location, whatever you want to call it, where we can share the faith, where we can do the spiritual formation. All right, now here are the 3 that I think we need to look at. Fourth is healing. Martin Kelsey says that 1/5 of the verses in the 4 Gospels are about healing or a discussion about healing. 1/5. Okay. And tell John's disciples the blind received their sight. Okay. Healing was such an important part of Jesus' ministry. The crowds came to him because he was curing the sick. I taught a D-Min class at Denver Seminary this summer. It was exciting for me because Denver Seminary used to be called Conservative Baptist Seminary. All right. And those folks in the evangelical and Pentecostal world haven't been too much part of my world. Okay. In fact, I asked 2 Pentecostal pastors in my class if I could go out to lunch with them because I would like to know what's going on in the Pentecostal church, and I haven't had much background. And they said, we're very good at raising our hands this way. Now we're learning to put the hands out this way. There is a tremendous interest now in the Pentecostal service about social justice, dealing with the marginal, etc. I thought that was really interesting. But one of the things that they kept saying to me was, you can't read literature now among Pentecostals, and this would have been true also of the evangelicals, if you don't see that the proclamation of the word and the demonstration of the word go hand in hand. There's no more the division between the 2. The 2 have to go together. Okay? Another one in my class was a Lutheran Missouri Synod pastor. He has 2 friends who are dentists, married to each other, and they got permission from the district president to use a church facility, and they're opening up a free dental clinic for people in Omaha. Okay, again, reaching out to the community. There was another Lutheran there who was in the local area, Lakewood, Colorado. He left the seminary and was assigned to refurbish the 5 o'clock Saturday service because only 25 people were coming. When he came, he interviewed them and decided that not that many people had many interest in Saturday, but they did have interest on Thursday, and they started a Thursday service, and now they have what they call the table. And they feed 300 homeless people every week, and they have the Eucharist afterwards, the table together. I can't emphasize enough to say that if you want some vitality, you want some energy in a place, focusing on the other is the first place you got to look. Okay? And we do know in psychological studies that altruism also has a benefit for the person who is the giver. I'm not saying that should be the motivation, but there is some sense of joy. The Hebrews have a word, simha, S-I-M-H-A-H, simha, which is the joy that you can only experience in sharing with another. Simha. I think that's what some of our service projects are. healing. Now, of course, healing takes place in a hospital, but there's the loneliness, there's the marginal, there are those who can't afford health care, etc., or even being advocates for health care for all. This is an important ministry, I think, for the church. Okay. Any questions on that? Second is social justice. Okay. Social justice issues. We live in a world today where we see the inequities. We know how certain populations have been mistreated. And now the emphasis, you just can't read a conservative theologian or a progressive theologian and not see something about social justice as being an important part of the Christian life. And then third is a word I used before, faithful presence. How do we help people live their Christianity in their life? There's a man named Marc Augé. I mentioned him in one of my last books. A French sociologist who said, we live in supermodernity. And part of supermodernity was we have built these large entities that are built not for intercourse or interaction, but just to pass through. Hotels, CarMax, airports, and he calls them non-places, because they're not built for people to engage one another. And he's wondered if these non-places have also seeped into our communities, where we're no longer engaging each other. All right. Then after I'd read Marc Augé, I read Ray Oldenburg's book, The Late Great Place, in which he laments the fact we no longer have the third place. Okay, the third place. The first two places are family and work, or to use Freud's expression, Arbeiten und Leben. Okay. The third place is the cafe, the front porch, the street corner, wherever people would meet to talk about the baseball scores, the weather, talk about politics at low key. Just where people would come. And I'm wondering sometimes if that isn't a place we miss sometimes. If the church couldn't become a third place again. I have 3 third places. One is Starbucks. They know my name. They know my drink. They know my grandchildren. They know what I do. They know me. They know me better than the people in my church. The second is the Chase Bank at the grocery store. They're always wondering why I get these checks from churches. I said they're easy takes. Okay. And one of them is reading one of my books right now. Okay. Just by interaction, chattering together. Okay. They know I'm a minister. They know I'm a Lutheran. And the other one is the golf range where I go hit my practice golf balls. It's just amazing what you can do on that relationship basis, okay? And that's being emphasized more and more too, by the way. How can we not worry about membership, but relationships? So I know now a church, rather than on Sunday announcing its membership and attendance, worship, it estimates how many people had relationships during the week. We have 300 members, and average they will be in some kind of contact with 9 people. So we had 2,700 contacts this week. I think that's kind of a neat idea, okay? I don't agree with this, but there were 16 churches in Minneapolis, all non-denominational, that suspended Sunday morning worship and went out and did work projects for the community. I would prefer what the Lutherans did. They worshiped on Sunday morning, had a meal, and then had the other exercise and so forth. And there's one church I know in Minneapolis, the pastor handed out $100 to 50 people, invested in the mission, okay? And the imaginative things that people did, right? And a 14-year-old got his grandmother to work with him in making sandwiches to feed the hungry. And they had something like 70 people involved. And this was a 14-year-old starting, okay? We're only sometimes limited by our imagination, okay? And if you believe in the new creation, if you believe that God's real intent is to have it all back again, recreate the creation that's fallen, and that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. If you believe in that, you don't make this separation between the spiritual and the material, between the world there and the world here. This is God's world, okay? And we do not need to protect people from it, okay? We need to get people to go and be a blessing. Now, you were right. We're changing the rules. You change the rules, you're going to pay for it in some form of anxiety. I'm going to go back to the brain. We now know that all new information, anything that is strange, unpredictable, bizarre, goes through the right lobe of the brain. As it becomes familiar, it crosses the bridge called the corpus callosum. It becomes part of the left lobe. So the left lobe is the location of everything that's known, familiar, the same, predictable. Okay? Here's the catch. The right lobe is also the location of all the negative emotions. And the left lobe is the location of all the positive emotions. So neurologically, we're designed to be on guard when it comes to something new or different or unfamiliar. Anger, disgust, fear, whatever you want to call it. Whereas when things are known and they're familiar, there's the mellowness, there's delight, there's joy. Okay? That's neurological. So we've got to learn how are we going to deal with that which is different and not be threatened by it. Okay? And that's hard because all of us will be threatened by something that isn't familiar to us. I have a friend who's a neuroscientist, and he claims people would prefer familiarity if they had a choice over happiness. And neurologically, that would be pretty much true. Okay? We feel comfortable when we know who we are and where we are and so forth. Okay? Now, someone just said to me, Pete, why don't you get a GPS? You travel a lot. It really would help you. And I said, no. It's sort of a puzzle to find the place. Okay? Especially when there's fog. And I said, that's part of the adventure. That's part of the adventure. And I kind of like the adventure. The GPS takes away the adventure. I'm sure it would cut down on any mistakes. I missed Story Road because the sign is so small. So you might want to tell the folks out of time they need a little bigger sign. But I turned around and came back, etc. And then I drove downtown and I was looking for a restaurant for a little breakfast. And there wasn't too much, but I finally found the Whistle Stop. Okay, yeah. They had a special for Mondays. Anyway, I like the adventure. Now, why do I use this word adventure? Because Ed Freeman said this, and I believe it. If you're going to change a system, and remember I said, no emotional system will change unless people change how they function with one another, okay? All right, what is that functioning, he said, that will change the system more rapidly and effectively than anything else? Going on an adventure. Okay. Stretching your resources. Doing something you never thought you could have done. All right, that's the adventure. The only place they don't like adventure is the cemetery. Okay? I mean, if you want to see homeostasis, which is to keep things the same, all you got to do is go where? The cemetery. Okay? And this is what we're up against, homeostasis. Homeostasis is the idea that people resist new things, fresh experiences, that which is especially extreme indifferences. Actually, by the way, it's very interesting. The phrase originally meant change that produced stability. Okay? Now, homeostasis really means a set point. Okay? And that's where a lot of our people are going to be, at a set point. There's no doubt about that. But again, we got to find the individuals who are motivated, who have some level of maturity, that we can instruct them and ask them to join us. Because John Kotter, Kotter, in Leading Change has said, you never start to initiate a change if you don't have a sense of urgency. And I think mission, building up that consciousness, gives us a sense of urgency. And he says you never then develop that sense of urgency alone. You always bring together a group with you. Okay? Because if you do it alone, you're going to get all the bullets. I mean, I experienced this doing interventions. I do it by myself. And people hire me to listen to them about what the problems are and then want me to feed back to them what I heard. It's a crazy job because I do that and they get mad at me. You know, the old idea, if you don't like the message, you shoot the messenger. Oh, that reminds me of Winston Churchill's remark. Nothing in life is more exhilarating than to be shot at and missed. But make sure you're missed, okay? That's the key. Okay. Every congregation, every emotional system will have homeostatic forces. We can't do it. We tried it yesterday. I don't want anything changed. Everything else is changing in the world. I want my church to stay the same, etc. Now, here's something Dr. Friedman said. The key to the kingdom, now he didn't say what the kingdom was, but he said the key to the kingdom is dealing with people's resistance. Okay. But here's the problem. The more you try to force the change, the more they're going to do what? Just fight back. They depend on it. Okay. So I was with a Presbyterian church in Pennsylvania. Clergy couple. Nice couple. Very bright. And over a 6-year period, they made a lot of changes. Okay. I mean, they brought that church from 1940 up to the present. Reminds me of the lady who was at one of my workshops who said, if 1950 were to return, my congregation would be ready. Well, they had brought this congregation up to the current. And there were little ripples at times. Okay? But, you know, silence in the church doesn't mean agreement. It's often passive-aggressive behavior. And finally, that erupted. What happened was she went to a spiritual formation workshop and fell in love with the labyrinth. She came back and purchased with undesignated funds a $6,000 labyrinth rug. I didn't even know they made it. But the organist choir director went on the internet and found out that it had pagan origins. And let the congregation know that our Presbyterian pastors are paganizing us. Okay. Well, that was only the tipping point. You hear what I'm saying? All of those other changes that had taken place, all the quiet, all going underneath, finally the homeostatic forces had their day. All right. And then there was all kinds of controversy. But there was no sense of urgency. It was her preference. It was her interest. Right? So to build up a sense of urgency is the beginning of change. Build up urgency. And we also know that no emotional system is going to change if you only appeal to the head. You also have to speak to the heart. And this, by the way, is where storytelling becomes so important. I mentioned our oldest daughter, who's the novelist. She said, stories have been such an elemental part of the learning experience for humans because it's the one teaching method which engages the thinking and the feeling vein simultaneously. I thought that was good insight. Okay. You got to follow the plot, the linear, imagine what's happening, and also when you get engaged into what's happening, you got the emotional. You're not going to make change if you don't get the people's emotions. It's not going to be done all cognitively. Okay? God is in this place at this time, asking us to do something. Because I've often thought that sometimes we Christians have spent so much time on God the Creator. I mean, it's in the creeds, begotten, proceeding, begotten of the Father. It's all about origins, okay? And part of the problem is God is also eschatos. God disturbs at times, all right? God turns things upside down. And sometimes people have asked, is God involved in what we're going through right now? Is this a bit of an eschatological moment, all right? To also know the future has to become something different because the present context has changed. Okay? That becomes a really important part of our thinking. In 37 of my last 44 interventions, in less than 4 years, I now have to increase from 13 triggers to 14. Because in these examples that I'm citing, there was something about the change process that created the controversy. It was done poorly, prematurely, inadequately, without concert with others, individually. You just name it, okay? And it's interesting because I've been talking about change. You go to other workshops, you hear about change. You read books, you go to workshops, but nobody teaches us the change process. Nobody. Okay? That is so crucial and important. How do you get the change process going? What is involved in what we do? And I don't think that's happening at seminaries either. They're talking more about a description of what's happening and giving us some prescriptions, but not necessarily giving us the tools that are needed to be change agents. Okay? I do not find us clergy to be high on the level of change agentry. Okay? And that's not an indictment of any one person. It just simply says, we're behind the times in some of our training. Okay. How do we become change agents? By the way, I was mentioning storytelling. I just read a book by Chip and Dan Heath, Heath, called Made to Stick. If I taught homiletics, I would have everybody read it. Why do people remember things and act on it? And it's called Made to Stick. And one of the key things in that whole thing is storytelling. Okay? Really fascinating. Because people can identify because we learn by association. Okay? We hear the story and we can connect it to something in our own life or something we experience with someone else. Powerful. In fact, I no longer use PowerPoint in short presentations like this. Because research indicates, again, people remember more and appropriate it to their life better if they hear it in a story than if they see it up on a PowerPoint. Okay. It's just something in our genes, because the oral tradition was with us until 500 years ago. Okay. And that's how we learned about things and knew about things. Till Gutenberg invented the printing press. Now it's going to be interesting to see what happens with our new social networking. But we are called to a new moment and a new day. That doesn't mean we jettison the tradition. Okay. I was mentioning this pilgrim church in Brooklyn, and the pastor said to me, he doesn't believe we can keep the cross as a central part of Christian faith without weekly communion. That was his idea. Okay? He saw that as one way to keep the cross in its central. So he says in this church, this UCC church, they're used to communing 4 times a year. Okay? So he's worked with his leadership, and they've got it to now monthly. And next year he's going on twice. And then the third year, he wants to do it weekly. But he's using it, and he's got a plan. He's got something that he's going to do for the future. Okay? Again, we're only limited by our own imaginations. And what you do in one part of Iowa and somebody else does in another part of Iowa doesn't mean it can be repeated or even emulated. Okay? I just believe everything's so much local today. Okay? And you just can't take something from this and patch it on over here. You might be able to learn something from it, but you can't necessarily duplicate it. And that's been a problem with a lot of the workshops you go to. Here's the formula that you follow. Here's how we were successful, which has no relevance really to where I am and where I live. So when I was invited by a church in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where they used to have 6 Lutheran churches, they now down to 1. 5 have closed in 12 years. And this is an old Swedish church that had about 1,200 members, now down to 300. Okay. And they wanted me to work with them, so they got out of what I call mission drift and got a clear sense of who they were. So I said, here's your first assignment. Number 1, I want 15 people who will train with me to interview individuals in this community. So we went to the health department, the fire department, the police department. We had somebody at the convenience store. We went to a realtor. We went to a banker. We went to 15 different people we interviewed. We found out there were 3 things in this community that were really needed, and this church could provide it. Okay? Number 1, there's a Catholic university, Sacred Heart, 1 mile away from the location. And the foreign students, because of the homophobia or xenophobia that is so prevalent today, are very frightened when they come to the United States. Could you find a way to adopt some of the foreign students and make their entry into this country easier on them, less fearful? So they now have a program for, this is a Lutheran church, having a program for Catholic University in working with their foreign students. Okay? Secondly, there are a lot of aging adults in the neighborhood, and most of the people that belong to this congregation don't live in the neighborhood. It's a regional church. And there's a need for adult daycare. And the health department said, oh, we have some funds for that. They now have an adult daycare program. Okay. Third, they have Sunday school classes not being used. There was a need for nonprofit organizations to have relative access to less expensive property. So now they have used some of their facility for nonprofit organizations. Now, for some people, what does that have to do with salvation? What does that have to do with gospel? It's the expression of the gospel. Okay? That's how the early church grew. I don't know how I can emphasize that. The early church grew. It was outlawed at one point. At one point in the early church, Rodney Stark says, there were bouncers at the door because they didn't want unbaptized people to come to worship because they might be informants. There were no evangelism tracts. There were no missionary societies. There were just a bunch of Hellenistic Jews who got onto this message and began to meet weekly in shops and houses, and the way they lived caught people's attention. All right? Now, if you want to go back to history, what did history tell us? Okay? It was when the Christians functioned in a different way from other people, based on what they believed. And I think that's so instructive to who we are today. Of course, along came Constantine and legalized Christianity. And that necessarily wasn't a blessing. Because a lot of people then wanted to become priests because Constantine put a lot of his resources into the church. And the church had a lot of indolent, immoral, uneducated clergy for many centuries. And yet the church survived. I saw one quote in Stark. It said, most of those who are coming in the priesthood want to have access to more beautiful women. Okay. But what created the difference? Another difference was how Christians treated women. There is neither free nor slave, male or female, you know the Greek or Jew. They're treating how they treated women. And that's still a big thing in our world, not necessarily in our country as much in a lot of the other countries where we have sexual trafficking. Women just don't have the rights. In fact, I just read something about the more women are liberated and have an education, okay, the lower the birth rate becomes. And in 2017, you will have more seniors alive in the world than juniors. They call it the gray tsunami. Okay. But think about that. What is that going to mean for the church's ministry? Okay. I think you get more of a hearing when people get older than necessarily when they're younger, correct? One of George Gallup's researchers is the son of a Southern Baptist pastor, and he wrote a book recently called God is Alive, and it's his contention that he believes those who today are not looking at the church may have a second look later on in their life as they get older, and those who are in the boomer world or in the gray tsunami, they also turn more attention to the church. There's all kinds of opportunity out there. What can we do for the elderly? It's going to become a huge mission opportunity. Julia Quinn, in the book Quitting Church, says, the ones who are quitting church today are educated women and single working mothers. I mean, 60% of the church membership has been female, all right? So the numbers are going down. How do we appeal to educated women and single working mothers? Another mission field, okay? I said it at lunch and I'll say it again. I don't think we're out of the game, okay? I don't think what we have to say, how we understand, interpret life, has lost any of its valor or its potency, but people don't like the vehicle through which it's being pronounced. This again doesn't say the church itself has enfeebled itself, but when you interview young people, their criticism of the church is too many of the people in the church are prejudiced, insensitive, non-caring, biased, homophobic, etc. Okay. How can we put a more positive light about who we are and what we do? I think this is, again, a challenge to the church. All right, let me take some questions before I do my final piece, okay? Get some questions?
You talk about using stories.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You talk about using stories.
Storytelling?
Yes, storytelling. What do you use as your resources besides your own life experiences? Are there good resources out there that can help produce that or the stories? Because as you begin to teach and preach, sometimes the resources seem to kind of dry up if you're just relying on your own background.
Huh. That'd be a good business for somebody. The Storytelling Center for Christian Missionaries. Moneyball, the movie. It is the best thing if you want to introduce change, is watch Moneyball. Billy Beane, it's about baseball, but it's about more than baseball. Billy Beane is general manager of the Oakland A's and says, we can't develop a baseball team like we did in the past because we're in a small market, and the big market teams can spend more money to get their players. So the context has changed. So he proposes something else. We will sign as many free agents whose statistics are as good as some of the high-powered people who we pay. Okay? Oh, you can't build a team that way. All right? Can't build a team that way. It's just a wonderful, wonderful movie about change. I mean, that's one story, okay? John Shea, I know, is a Roman Catholic priest, does books on stories. I try to stay away too much from some of my own personal stories because people kind of get sick and tired of that, you know. And I do that I do that because I still think it's important. It was Reinhold Niebuhr who said, preaching isn't about the doctor who just performed a surgery. Preaching is about the patient telling about the surgery. There's something about that personal aspect of it. So your own stories are important. But I've heard a lot of lay people complain, all I hear is about this guy's children or grandmother or something. So you got to use that somewhat sparingly. I just look for stories that I find in my reading. I guess you don't get too much in terms of storytelling if you don't do some reading. But you can also find on the internet, there's some good stories that are there. Huh? The more you engage in mission. Oh, I think that's right. The more you engage with people and you're out in relationships, the more you have stories. I got one from my own son. My own son does not attend church. Just moved to Austin. And as an avocation, he's a musician. And he was teaching robotics at Queens College in Brooklyn. And he makes robotic instruments. And when he goes and plays at night, he's got a drum set that plays itself, and he's got 11 other instruments that are all computerized. So he's got a band, but he's the only living instrumentalist, okay? And he just put out a record. And what he did, he went on this thing on the internet and got people to volunteer money. And what is that called? You know? Huh? And if you get so much money, you got a free copy of the DVD. And he raised enough money to do it. And it's all music that he wrote, except for one. And he gave me the DVD, and I'm playing it. All of a sudden, in the midst of all these songs that he invented, is "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." Okay? And it's his own interpretation of the song. And I said, why did you put this in this DVD with all these new all these new songs? He says, that's what I believe. Okay. Now, he may not be going to church, all right? He doesn't speak against the church. He will go Christmas Eve. But that's what I believe, all right? That's what I believe. Did Jesus ever ask anybody to go to church? Did he ever ask anybody to join the church? It was, I care about you, I see you, I recognize you, you're there, and especially those who weren't recognized very much by others. Yes?
The question about the story.
Go ahead. You got a resource?
No.
Oh.
Craddock used to talk about stories all the time. I used to have the same question. So what is this story? Until one day the big light bulb went off. Years later, it's telling everything in story. As you preach it, as you teach it, and you're doing it in story form, then people also then understand.
Yeah.
Until I realized that concept, I was kind of totally lost myself. So, but for me, that's been helpful because people will listen to a story form. So,
well, today with mass media, we think in images. Okay. I don't know what else to say about it. We learn in different ways today, and that storytelling is so. Uh-huh.
Imagine yourself then telling them their story.
Yeah.
What's it like now being in the water, so we're taking it in the same story form.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes there are people in your own parish that are good storytellers, and they can share with you some stories that are important. All right, I want to go back to the brain again. I'm not a neuroscientist. I just love to read books about the brain. In the lower part of the brain is a section called the amygdala. A-M-Y-G-D-A-L-A. Okay? And people have called it the anxiety alarm system, the fear button. And the interesting thing about the amygdala is it's never turned off. It's always ready to go. And the amygdala has no sense of time. So if something out in the environment was threatening and the amygdala acted, and a same situation reoccurs, what does the amygdala do? It fires. Okay? No sense of time. Well, here's a story. When I was 3 years old, I grew up in New York. Mrs. Magnuson's German Shepherd dog got out into our yard. And as a preface to this story, I got to tell you that my 2 older brothers and I used to taunt this dog. But there was always a fence between us, a wire mesh fence. But now the dog's in our yard. My older brothers make it in the house. I climb a quince tree, which puts me high enough so the dog traumatizes me, but doesn't harm me. Finally, an adult takes this dog away. Still to this day, if I see a German Shepherd dog, my body freezes. My amygdala says, don't you ever forget that dog. I could see a Rottweiler, Doberman, Pinscher, I wouldn't have the same reaction. But if there's anything that looks like a German Shepherd dog. Someone recently sent me a picture of 12 German Shepherd dogs lined up. And going before it, right in front of it, is a cat. And the caption says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Okay. You know, there are just certain things inside of us that are there for self-protection. Okay? And part of what we have to learn is to learn that I don't always need that as protection. Okay? I may have some other options because anxiety makes us dumber. Anxiety closes down your options. That's a problem with anxiety. We just can't think out of the box. The higher the anxiety, the less the learning experience. So one of the things we have to do is when we want to induce more of a mission consciousness in our people is stop talking about crisis of the church. All right? And start talking about a new opportunity to be the church. All right? And I think that has a lot to do with the amygdala. Because when you keep talking about the crisis, the dysfunction, the end of, and all this stuff, you're going to activate the amygdala. And then you're going to shut down the learning. Okay? Because it's only through system number 2, as they call it, the left prefrontal cortex, that we can sift out options. We can look at things in a wider kind of context. All right? So how we approach it, and maybe this is key to changing the environment, part of changing the environment is changing ourselves. If I go in and do an intervention with a church that's highly anxious, in an anxious state, I'm not going to do much. I got to remain neutral. And I'll be honest, I do better with churches than at home. Because I can keep more of that neutrality going. Okay. But we're going to have people in our churches whose amygdala can easily be fired. Because we're living in a culture now where we have a lot of fear entrepreneurs. People who make a living by stirring up our amygdala, hijacking it. And by keeping us at a high level of tension and so forth. Okay. And the other part of that is, why do we allow ourselves to be prey to their fear-mongering? And in the scriptures, remember, one of Jesus' favorite statement is what? Be not afraid. Fear not. Exactly. Like Jesus knew what? That amygdala is just ready to go at any time. Okay? Fear not. Okay? For I say unto you. Okay? And that was in a well-differentiated, non-anxious kind of way. And that's why I do like Bowen's phrase, the non-anxious presence. How you handle yourself can influence the system. And you do it in 4 ways. Okay. I want to talk about the emotional field. Field is a region of influence, like the gravity field, the magnetic field. And a field comes into existence because material things come near each other. But the field itself is immaterial. Okay? So the emotional field is immaterial, but it happens because there are people there. Okay? So you're in a room and somebody gets excited and angry and you can almost feel the tension, right? That's the emotional field active. All right, because of your position in the emotional field, you can influence that field in 4 ways that nobody else can. Okay? This is where I'm going to try to elevate your thinking about your position as pastor. It's not because of your rank, reverend. It has nothing to do with status. It has to do with your position. Okay? And that'd be true of bishop. Because of the bishop's position, he can have an effect on the conference as an emotional field, like nobody else could. All right, number 1, when there's a crisis, you can bring calm. You don't send your associate. You don't send some substitute. When there's a crisis, you have to be there. Okay? Your presence in itself will bring calm to the system. And many of you have seen this in crisis situations, where you're the only one who has their head on. Everybody else is emotionally scattered all over the place. Okay? In 1989, I was invited by Lutheran Disaster Response to go to Charleston, South Carolina, because Hurricane Hugo had devastated the coastline. I couldn't land in Charleston, so I landed in Columbia, rented a car, and drove to Charleston, 2 hours away. And on the radio that Sunday morning was Mayor Joseph Riley. He was fielding questions from citizens who called in to the radio program, because the night before, an Episcopal priest had gone to Mayor Joseph Riley and said, "This town is in pandemonium, sir. You have to have your head on." So in response to that challenge, he went on the radio and fielded questions. And I remember that morning he coined a phrase, "We can do it." Okay? We can do it. And all over Charleston over the next week, you saw what signs? We can do it. Remember 9/11? United, we stand. Okay. For his behavior, his functioning, he got the nickname St. Joseph. Okay. You could have sent the best surgeon, the superintendent of schools, the president of the college. It wouldn't have been the same. It had to be whom? The mayor, because of his position. Remember 9/11, George Bush is sitting there on that pile of stuff in a jacket, arm around a firefighter with the bullhorn. He's present. Compared to he's in an airplane looking down at Hurricane Katrina's devastation. Very different. Okay? You've got to be there. Okay? And I was just thinking about the Newtown, Massachusetts, and had a memorial service. And they included different religious individuals in that service. Okay? To calm the system, okay, because of their position in the church. And it also said to me, the church isn't always irrelevant, is it? Okay. Where else could people have gathered? Where else could people have seen solace? Not at the atheist meeting, you know, not at the National Rifle Associated meeting for sure. Okay, the church was present. It was their faithful presence. Go ahead.
You say that the calming presence isn't always the unemotional presence.
That doesn't mean that you're avoid of emotion, but you do have some control over the emotion. It doesn't mean you couldn't cry. Okay. I remember sitting with a family in their bedroom, and their little 2-month-old had died, a SIDS victim. And I said, I can only sit here and cry with you. I don't know what to say at this moment, but I'm going to be with you in these coming weeks, okay? There has to be some kind of assurance, hope, you're going to be there. All right, now just the opposite. A system isn't going to change if it's not challenged. Most of our churches go under-challenged. I'm convinced of it. And the body politic, just like the physical body, in order to be healthy, has to be challenged. Okay? We got to become runners and weightlifters. You know, somehow or other, pushing ourselves. Because the body politic can't be healthy if it's not challenged. We had a situation in our congregation with about 1,000 members. And there was a young family, and this little girl, a year and a half, needed surgery, but the HMO wouldn't pay for it. So Thriving Financial for Lutheran, an insurance agency, said, we'll pay for half of the surgery if the congregation comes up with the other half. We raised $48,000 in 72 hours. Okay. The chair of the stewardship committee on Sunday morning came to the congregation and said, on behalf of the little girl and her parents, I want to thank you for your rapid response. And then he said, and I expect next year that our stewardship will increase by $48,000. Challenge. Okay. We're afraid sometimes to challenge people, to look in another direction, to do something different, you know, whatever it is. Okay. Just think of dieting, and what I said before about technical and adaptive problems. Most diets fail because we give technical solutions to weight loss. Don't take any more butter, watch out for any white bread, and all that other stuff. But real dieting that pays off is you change your lifestyle. It's a change in yourself, not just these externals, okay? That's what's important. Challenge. Are we challenging our people to new ways of looking, acting, relating? That's crucial. Third, the system will not change if you're not on board. Your absence in support of the change already sabotages it. Okay? That's just about emotional systems. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said, no significant change has ever occurred in history because at first the majority voted for it. Okay? It always started with an individual or a small group. Okay? And you can never just make one change, because as soon as you make this change, it has a reverberating effect upon other parts of the system. You always got to remember that, okay? Now, I'm not saying that everything we do and everything we look at has to change, but I do know this. I have worked with 214 congregations in 25 years in conflict. 8 denominations, 26 states. And without exception, the people, by their own admission, said, here's one of our problems. We don't have a clear sense of mission. It's just there. I can't deny that 214 out of 214. Because the next thing is, you're the one who has to keep the people focused. You can't do much if you lose focus. In my last book, I call it mission drift. All right? God has called us to be His people at this time in Boone to do what? To be who? All right? And that you have to enunciate over and over again. Okay? You have to give the focus. Because it's so easy for us to get distracted, to get habitual, to get forgetful. What can happen? You as the leader provide that focus, okay, like nobody else can. So what I attempt to do when I work with churches in conflict is, what can we do here to stay focused? And I'm not talking about a mission statement. Oh, we're going to redo our mission statement. No, you got to review your mission. Who are you, and why are you here, and what's it all about? What's this for? That's what I'm talking about. Okay. Yes.
What about if we are stuck with our interpretation or understanding of the mission?
What if we're stuck in our understanding?
We have a mission that we are united enough with.
I need to come back here and do new visions. Okay? Or you need to put something in place so you get out of that stuckness. It's possible. I've seen it.
Yes.
I know it. But it's not going to happen if it's not intentional. Okay? We're talking about it, but we're going to be also intentional for it to happen, take place. Yeah. And I would say there's a lot of churches. I mean, if I have 214 churches in conflict because they don't have a sense of mission, there's more than those 214 out there. And it's not just the church, by the way. Okay. It's involved business. What's education about? All of the other institutions. What's our focus? What are we about? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Our time is just about up. I want to do one last thing. Okay. Yes.
God is in charge and He is going to take care of the people.
I don't know about the last statement, but I do remember saying God is in charge. That's the kingdom of God. God reigns. Yeah. And I wouldn't.
He invites us to be a part of taking care of the people.
I believe that. We become the heart, the hands, the voice, the eyes. Definitely. I want to go back to eschatology. Eschatology means the future impacts the present. Tomorrow has an influence on today. The promises of God can be effective right now. That's eschatology. Unfortunately, some people look at it just as the end things. No, no, no. It's how the influence of the future affects our lives today. And John Westerhoff, who taught at Duke, Episcopal priest, compared eschatology to a football game. Your team's losing 35-7. There's only 30 seconds left. It's the fourth quarter. But your band strikes up the victory song. That's eschatology. Desmond Tutu said, I've read the end of the story. Never, never, never give up. We win. Okay? And then, of course, I talked about Teleki. If you possess the last hour, you need not be anxious about the next moment. Okay? And here's my statement. We cannot be as anxious as everybody else. Anxiety flows down. If you're highly anxious, your community is leaderless. And your community needs you to lead it. Okay? Do not be anxious. God will provide. Thank you.